Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Movies. They're pretty good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, and today marks the first episode of basically Christmas movies. I decided I'll do every episode between once December starts and Christmas happens, then will be a Christmas episode. But today I'm starting off with an unconventional pick, and this year's unconventional Christmas movie is Eyes Wide Shut. Stanley Kubrick's last movie. It was released after his death. He died 4 days after turning in the final cut to the studio. And let's get into it. 1999's Eyes Wide Shut. All right. So, starts off right off the bat. It's Nicole Kidman, and her character's name is Alice, and Tom Cruise, his character's name is Bill. They're getting ready for a party. An interesting thing is that they are married in real life at this point. So that kind of, you would think that this would add to like they have such good chemistry because they're married in real life, but this is Tom Cruise and he's like maybe not human. So there we go. Like I said, Tom Cruise, his name is Bill Hartford. He's a doctor. You find out that he gets invited to these rich parties because he makes house calls to these like super rich people. So like don't really know anybody at these parties, but they go every single year. As they're dancing at the party, Bill recognizes the piano player and he says, "Hey, I went to medical school with that guy." And so after he's done playing, he goes over and talks to him. His name is Nick Nightingale. You find out that he had dropped out of medical school. He doesn't really explain why, but just that he never graduated or anything like that. So yeah, while he's off talking to the piano player Nick, Alice is out there and gets approached by some weird Hungarian guy. It's like very flirty with her. Basically like walks up to her, grabs her like champagne flute and then just downs it like right in front of her. He's like, "Oh, is this yours?" And then he just drinks it. And it's like, okay, like cool move, I guess. Like, I don't know. So yeah, they start dancing and they're like, he's very flirty like right off the bat, and she's like kind of like playing into it too. But then also like not like she's not going too far or anything like that. But still, very flirty energy. Both of them are giving off. So while he's off, after he's done talking to his friend Nick, these two women start talking to Dr. Hartford, Bill. They're two models, I guess, and he's met one of them before. But they're also like super, super flirty to him and everything like that. And just like, they're basically like luring him away to have a threesome, it seems like. But then he gets approached by somebody. Oh yeah, so he's talking to these two women, and then he asks like, "Oh, like by the way, where are we going?" And one of them like whispers in his ear where the rainbow ends. And then someone approaches him and says, "Dr. Hartford, Mr. Ziegler needs your help." Mr. Ziegler is the rich man that he does house calls for, is one of his patients, and invited him there to that party. So he's like, okay, like I gotta go up there. So goes up into Ziegler's office, penthouse, I don't know what it is, and there's this naked girl passed out in an armchair, and you find out that she's OD'd. Ziegler's just there, like, putting his pants on, like, oh, I don't know what the hell's her problem, like, but take care of it. That type of energy. And, like, kind of, like, half concerned, but, like, kind of just, like, wants the problem to go away. Like, that's all he's really worried about. By the way, Ziegler's married. Like, you see his wife, like, early in the scene. Like, that when Bill and Alice get to the party. So he's like, oh, like basically there with his wife, like make appearances and then go have sex with a prostitute upstairs. So, oh yeah, so he's like, oh, like what happened to her? Ziegler says that she OD'd on a speedball, which is heroin and coke. And Bill like takes his advice. He's like, okay, like well, she's breathing, and then he's just trying to like get her to come to and everything like that. We cut back to the Hungarian, and he's like trying to lure Alice up to the sculpture gallery upstairs, basically to have sex. But he doesn't like come right out and say that, but she kind of reveals it later. And not that you need it revealed, because it's very obvious that that's what he's trying to do. But she's not wanting to do that. She's like, no, like I'm married. Besides, like you're coming off too strong, that type of deal. And then it's cutting back to Ziegler's office. Ziegler's played by Sidney Pollack. He's pretty good. He's giving off that like authoritative type attitude, but also like friendly, but also like kind of scary too. So yeah, just a good performance by him. You could tell, you kind of get the idea that this is probably why like Bill gets invited to these parties, is because he does this kind of stuff for Ziegler all the time, where he kind of takes care of someone that OD'd on him, or covers up some medical thing, probably like got rid of a STD or two for him and stuff like that. So yeah, that's basically how he gets invited to this rich party, by covering up for his rich doctor friend, or rich person friend. He's the doctor. Ugh. Party's over, and it cuts to them. They're back at the house. She's looking in the mirror, and then Bill comes up behind her trying to be all sexy. And then this is also like, it's like, okay, they're married, but this is like, he's like trying too hard, and I'm just not buying it. I think it's just because I just know too much about Tom Cruise. Like, I hear that he's a really nice guy, but also just like very unaware how like normal people act. So then then you just get a scene of like what their day-to-day life is like. He's going to work. He's working on like all kinds of patients. You see like a woman getting a breast exam. You see a kid. You see an old man. So he's just like a general practitioner. No like specialty or anything like that. Then you see her. She's with their daughter. She's eating cereal, watching cartoons, and she helps her with homework, that type of stuff. Nothing too exciting going on her side. But he gets back from work, and then she goes into the bathroom, pulls a Band-Aid box out of the medicine cabinet, and that's where the weed stash is, apparently. And then you got to know this is 1999 in New York City. That's where it takes place, by the way, New York City. So obviously, I mean, 1999, I don't think anywhere in the U.S. weed is legal at that point, but definitely not in New York. I think still it's definitely not recreational. Maybe it's medicinal at this point, but I don't know. Who knows? So it's like, oh, it's very taboo that they're smoking weed in 1999. It's weird because I think in the 70s it was very normal, like on movies and stuff, and then 70s and 80s it would just be there, and then for some reason in the 90s and early 2000s it was like a big deal, and then now it's not a big deal again. Obviously, it's just very casual. So they're smoking on the bed together, acting very high, which also makes me wonder if they've ever done it in real life. Probably not at that point, but oh yeah. So at this point, then she asks about the two girls, like, who were those two girls that you were with? And he's like, oh, they were models. And she's like, oh, did you go, like, where'd you go with them for so long? Did you have sex with them? And he, like, it's funny because we know he didn't, but the way he, like, responds, like, what? No, I didn't do that. It just, it looks and sounds so suspicious. And I think that's just another, like, Tom Cruise not knowing how to be a human moment. But it's just funny. It's like if we didn't see that he didn't do that, then you would think from his reaction that he's lying. But we know that he's not. So it's just kind of weird. So then this like leads to an argument because he's also asking about the Hungarian guy, and then she like tells the truth. Like, yeah, he wanted to take me upstairs and fuck me. That's what she said. And so then it like, and he's not like making a big deal about it. Like she's making the bigger deal about him with the girls, it seems like. And then also like it's somehow turns into an argument about the fact that he has female patients, and then asks if like what he's thinking about when like he's examining them and stuff like that. And he's like, I'm a doctor. Like that's just my job. Like that's not on my mind. Like sex is the furthest thing from my mind at that point. And she's like, what about the patients? Like what, like are they thinking about like sexy Dr. Hartford? And he's like, probably not, because the reason that I'm examining them is that they might have cancer. So that's probably not what they're thinking about. They're probably just thinking, oh God, I hope I don't have cancer. And which is a good point. Like I would assume that like anytime I've been to the doctor and I'm getting an exam and in some kind of predicament, then like I'm not thinking about anything like, oh, like they're touching my balls. Like I'm not thinking about that. Like I don't know. It's just weird. That makes me wonder, like, is that the actors? Is that Stanley Kubrick not knowing like real life? But he's like old at this point. Like he should know. Like, and I don't think I've ever, thinking to his other movies, it's not weird like that. So I don't know. Who knows? Oh yeah. So they keep having this argument, and then she's upset that he's not jealous of her, like that she was like flirting with this guy, and she's basically like mad that he's like level-headed about it. And it's like, well, like what? Like I trust you. And then she's like, so oh yeah, it's just like what, like why are you so sure of yourself? And he says, I'm sure of you. And she just starts like laughing and laughing and laughing at him, like hysterical laughing at him. And he's like, just like, okay, like what's so funny? And then she starts to tell the story about how they were on vacation together, and there was in Cape Cod, and there's this sailor there, this Navy sailor, that glanced at her in the lobby, and she was saying like for him it was just a glance, like all he did was glance at her, but like she could not like stop thinking about him like the whole time, and just like kept thinking and thinking and thinking about him. And she's just saying how like when she was having sex with Bill on the vacation, that like she was thinking about the sailor, and if the sailor like made a move on her, that she was ready to give up everything, give up her husband, give up her daughter, everything, to like go away with this guy, like just because he glanced at her. And so like obviously that's like kind of a blow, like ego, emotion, everything to Bill at this point. It's like I mean, I think for anybody to hear that, especially if you're like so sure, like, oh, I don't think my wife's gonna cheat on me. And it didn't seem like he had any intention of like cheating on her with these two models. Like, yeah, he was like a little flirty back to them, not nearly as flirty as she was to the Hungarian guy, but also just like very like, okay, like that's enough, like. And then was very happy to leave with the butler guy to go up to Ziegler's office. So anyways, tension's broken by him getting a call on his cell phone, and he seems a little like, oh no, like what happened, and then when did it happen? And he's you find out that one of his patients like had died, and so he's like, okay, like I gotta go over there and like show my face, like basically to the family and everything. So we're to gather that he's the family doctor for this whole family, probably. So he's taking a cab over there the whole time. He's getting these like flashes and like images in his head of Alice with the sailor on the bed kissing and stuff like that. So that's like, it's really like bothering him, and he keeps thinking about it. So he's there. He gets to, it's another very rich person, we can tell. He's talking to the daughter. Her name's Marion, and he's just kind of like checking in on her to like see how she is, and she's like a little distraught. Obviously, like her dad died, but kind of just a little spacey and everything like that, and just keeps just like talking about like I heard you got engaged and stuff like that to Marion, and she's like, oh yeah, but then like Marion leans in and kisses Bill like really hard, and then he's like, whoa, like what are you doing? Like she's like, oh, like I love you, like I'm in love with you, and he's like, I've barely know you, like we've only ever talked about your dad, like you don't love me, like what are you talking about? And then that tension's broken by, and then it makes new tension. Oh yeah, that she like when she's confessing her love, she's saying that she's gonna leave. She wants to leave Carl, and just to be with him. Like she's fine like throwing that relationship away just to live in the same city as Dr. Hartford, Bill. And so he's like, okay, that's really weird. But then Carl gets there. And then what's funny is like Carl just looks like a great value Tom Cruise. So obviously like she's had these like deep-seated feelings for him for a long time, and like knew that she couldn't have him because he's married or whatever, and just like found some like the next closest look-alike person to him. But then Bill's like, all right, yeah, like I gotta go. So he's like starts walking home. And then he's like still having those images of Alice with the sailor. And then as he's walking, like a bunch of college jocks show up, like very cartoonish. And they like push Bill into a car, and they're calling him gay because he's short. So I don't know if that's like a thing. Like all short people are gay. Like I never knew that was a stereotype in 1999. Like, but apparently it was, or at least someone writing the script thought it was. The irony is that there are the rumors that Tom Cruise is a closeted gay man, but maybe that's like a little bit of the writers getting a little bit of that in there. But it's just weird that they're like calling him gay because he's short. That's the weird part. Anyway, so then like he gets up and he's walking again. He gets to a crosswalk, and this sex worker comes up to him and is asking him if he wants to have a good time, that type of thing, like the typical sales pitch. This is her name is Domino. She's Allison from Hocus Pocus. I'm forgetting the actress's name. Vanessa Shaw. So yeah, he's like, and I think just because of this whole thing, like where he had this image that like he never had the intention to ever cheat on his wife before. And then just to find out how easily she was ready to give everything up just to be with this sailor. Yeah, I think that this is like, it's messing with his head, and he's like, okay, like I'm going to go with this woman and see what happens. So they go to her apartment, which just happens to be like right there. He's like, oh, like, do you live alone? She says, no, I have a roommate, but she's out. So like, no one's going to bother us. So they get in there. He's being all awkward, of course. And she's like, so what do you want to do? And then he's like, what do you recommend? And then so she like kind of laughs at him, like, what do you like, that's a weird question. And then he's like, oh, okay, like, how about I'll charge $150? I'm not going to, like, keep track of time or anything like that. And, that'll be the charge or whatever. And so as they're, like, about to start, and I think they're kissing already, but then he gets another call on his cell phone, and it's Alice. And so that's, like, obviously, like, kind of a wake-up call, like, literally. And so he talks to her. He's pretending like he's still at the, at Marion's house where her dad died, and like he's still being there with the family and waiting for more relatives to arrive, and like he's still there comforting and everything like that. That's the persona that he's putting on. But so she's like, okay, like, well, I'm gonna go to bed, and that's it. So he doesn't go through with it. He like feels bad, and he's like, I just gotta go. And she's like, oh, is it because of Mrs. Dr. Bill? And he's like, yeah, like, and then but he still pays her because he feels bad, and then just goes back out on the street, back to walking home. And then he passes a jazz club, and then he remembers that that's where his friend Nick is playing. Because when he talked to him, he's like, oh, like, I'm playing at this one place, and then doing a couple parties like this. So he goes in there. Nick's still playing, even though it's like late at night, and gets a table, sits down, and like he's there right as like the last song. And so Nick gets off stage. Then Bill calls him over to talk to him, and they're sitting there at the table. They each order a drink. So as they're talking, he's saying like, "Oh, like I go to this like crazy gig, like." Because Bill's asking him, like, is this all you do? Is this play this club? And he's like, no, I've done a few parties, kind of like the one, but a little crazier. And he's like, what do you mean crazier? He's like, well, I get, because he's also like, oh, I got another gig tonight at 2 a.m. And he's like, where is it? And he says, I don't know. And he's like, what do you mean you don't know? He's like, I get, it's always at a different location, and I get told about an hour before the gig starts, and when I get there, I'm blindfolded. And he's like, whoa, like, what are you talking about? Like, that's crazy. Like, why are you blindfolded? And he's like, well, let's just say one of the time, like the last time I was there, the blindfold wasn't on so tight, so I was able to see a little bit. And he's talking about like these like, there's like all these like gorgeous women there and stuff, and he's like, okay, like, and then so he's like kind of piqued Bill's interest. Like this, I mean, that would pique anyone's interest. Like even if you weren't out to revenge, cheat on your wife, like it's just the concept of this like secret party where the piano player is blindfolded. That's intriguing to anybody. Oh yeah, so at this point he gets the call from that's with the location, and Bill's watching him as he takes a pen out and writes down the word Fidelio on a napkin. And so then after he gets off the phone, Bill's like, what is this? Like, what the hell is this? And he's like, that's the password to get into the party. And he's like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, password? He's like, you got to tell me where this is. Like, you can't just, like, tell me about this and then not tell me where it is. And he's like, you wouldn't even be able to get in with these clothes. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, because he's in, like, a nice suit. Like, obviously, he's like, no, you got to be in, like, a tux with, like, a costume and a mask. And he's like, okay, like, it's like, shit, like, I want to go to this, so I just need to find a costume. Like, if just tell me where it is, and if I can get a costume, then I'll be there, So he like, reluctantly tells him, but he does tell him. So he gets in a cab. He has an idea of, like, where to get a costume, and he shows up at this place that is called the Rainbow, or Under the Rainbow, something like that. But that seems to be a callback to earlier when he's talking about the models, and they're like, oh, where are we going, where the rainbow ends. And I don't know if that is, like, I mean, it's obviously on purpose, but I don't know what the purpose is. I don't know if it's like to say that these women are involved with the stuff that is about to come or what. But either way, it's just an interesting detail that people might have missed. So he gets there. He's like, oh, I forget the name that he's asking for, but that person isn't there anymore. Like, he moved away. And so he's like, oh, I'm a doctor of this guy that used to own this business. And he's like, oh, okay, like, he moved away, so, but I run it now. And he's like, okay, like, the thing is, like, I need a costume, so I'm willing to pay $100 over the rental price if you help me right now, even though it's the middle of the night. And the guy's like, no, like, okay, fine, like, I really need it, $200. And he's like, $200 over? Okay, fine, like, I'll do it. And so he grabs his keys and he opens up the costume shop, And he gets in there and he's like, okay, like, what do you need? And he's like, I need a tux, cloak with a cloak, with a hood, and a mask. And he's like, oh, like, what about this? Like, what about this? He's like, nah, just the regular tux, regular cloak with a hood, and then a mask. That's it. Like, nothing fancy. I mean, fancy, yes, but nothing flashy. So he's there, like, showing them the costumes and everything. And then they hear a noise in the back room. And then there's these two older, like, not older, but, like, probably middle-aged men. And they're, like, naked with, like, makeup on. And, like, what the hell? Like, who are you? And then there's this very young-looking girl. It's Lily Sobieski. She was in a lot of stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s. Never Been Kissed is what I know her from. Like, I think the actress was of age at the time. I'd like to think so. You don't see her naked or anything like that, but it is very implied that she is an underage girl with these older men. And then, so, like, the costume shop owner, like, locks the men in the room and says he's gonna call the cops. Like, so at least he's, like, seems to be doing the right thing, and she's just all happy and, like, giggly about it or whatever, which is kind of like a weird tone for it. Like, it definitely makes me uncomfortable, which I think is the point. It's not like you're not supposed to say, oh, those silly pedophiles with the underage girl. I don't think that that's, like, what they're going for. I think it is, like, supposed to make you uncomfortable, because you could see, like, we're on this journey with Tom Cruise, and he looks uncomfortable. So I think that is the tone that they're trying to put out there. But it is just a very uncomfortable scene. But he ends up leaving with the mask and the tux and the cloak and everything. Gets another cab. Cab is leaving the city, going off into the suburbs. I don't know if it's, like, in Jersey or just upstate. I'm not familiar enough with the area to know, like, oh, he's going over this bridge, that means he's going over here. I don't know. New Yorkers might know, but I do not. And so, and then he gets, like, they're driving through the woods, and then they get to this big, like, gate, and there's these two men, like, sitting out, and they're, like, eyes glued to the cab as he's, like, pulling up. And so the cab stops, and he's like, okay, like, I told you I would, like, pay you the meter no matter what. And he's like, all right, here's $100 bill, and he rips it in half, and he's like, I'll give you this half now, and if you stay here with the meter running, then I'll give you the other half plus whatever I owe you for the meter. He's like, okay, like, fine, like, I'll do it. And so he gets his he already has his costume on, never mind. For some reason I thought he got his costume out of the trunk, but he does not. I think I was thinking that because when I was watching him, like, hey, you forgot your costume, but then I realized he had it on already. So he goes up walks up to the two gentlemen by the gate, and they're like, can we help you, sir? And he's like, I suppose I'm supposed to give you the password. And they're like, if you wish. And then he says Fidelio, and they're like, okay, like, we'll have the car bring you up. So car comes down, takes him up to this giant mansion, and he gets out, gets inside. There's another guy in there, and he, like, takes his coat. He's sure to makes sure to get the mask out of the pocket before he gives the guy his coat. And he's like, password, and he says Fidelio, which, that's the password. So grabs his mask, puts it on, and walks into the party. As he's, like, getting in there, there's, like, this room filled with people. They're, like, watching from along the walls, up in the balcony and stuff like that. There's this circle of hooded figures. They're wearing, like, black hoods, as a person in a red cloak is walking in the middle. They're swinging a little incense thing, and chanting. I looked it up because I was like, it sounded weird, but then I found out that the audio, that it was they were chanting in Romanian, and then the audio is played backwards. That way, it's like intentionally uncomfortable and like disorienting. So as Bill's standing off to the side, watching this, he looks up at the balcony, and there's two people in masks that look like directly at him. They make eye contact with him and nod at him. So it's like, okay, do they know who he is? What is that like? Why did they do that? So that was interesting. Then at some point, all the circle of people with the robes stands up, and they remove the robes, and it's all women, and they're all naked except they're wearing like G-strings, and they still have the masks on. All the masks are different. They're doing some weird like ritual where they like lean over to each other and kiss with the masks, and it's like all very like ritualistic. And then they like break off from the group and like pick like a man and walk off with them. And then one of them goes straight for Bill and is walking and talking with him. And as they're walking, she says, "You don't belong here." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And she says, "You are in great danger." And so he's trying to get more information out of her, but she's not saying anything. And but like before she can even get the chance to say anything, a man comes up and escorts her away from him. So then he's like kind of by himself, and he's walking through, and basically he's like, it's the very like typical office Christmas party vibe where it's just a big giant orgy. We've all been there. Basically like what I think this is, that it's like it's giving off like this. I think this is what QAnon thinks like is going on with everybody that is in the higher tax bracket. And like you have all your like big wigs there. Hillary Clinton's there, Bill Clinton's there, you got Epstein, he's still alive at this point. You got the Lolita Express is parked out front. George Soros that's his house probably. But so he's just walking through, and there's just a bunch of people having sex, the usual. And so this other girl like walks in with another guy, and they're like whispering to each other, and then he like kind of nods at Bill, and not like Bill can't see this because he's just like watching people. This is all happening behind him, and so he's like, all right, go talk to him, kind of. And so she goes and starts talking to Bill and kind of like wanting to take him away with her. But then the other girl comes back, and she's like, no, I got it from here, kind of like saves him, presumably. I don't know what this other girl's intentions were, but like as a viewer, like knowing what little information we have, like I feel more safe with the first girl. So as they're walking like away, and I think she's like trying to get him out of there, maybe, a guy comes up and says like, "Excuse me, sir, are you the one that arrived in a cab?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Your cab driver needs to ask you something," or whatever. And he's like, "Oh, okay, like that seems weird." And he's like, "Come with me." And so he's walking away with this butler guy, but then instead of getting escorted to the front door, he gets escorted back to that like big ritual hall. And I forgot to mention before, but like during this whole like the ritual with the incense and everything and the backwards Romanian, Nick was there playing the like it was like a pipe organ, but like a electronic one. And he was blindfolded and everything. So as Bill's getting escorted into that room, Nick's getting escorted out, and then they start questioning Bill, like, why are you here? And they know his name and everything. They're like we know you're Dr. Bill Hartford, and how did you get here, and stuff like that. And the funny thing is that it's a guy in red. It's like sitting on a throne, and he's the one asking the questions. And he also like he's masked and everything, so everyone's masked, obviously, but and not like pandemic masks, like, you know, party masks. And the funny thing is that he sounds like the like winged lion king guy from the Island of Misfit Toys and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, King Moonrazer. Like, that's the voice. Like, I'm not going to do the voice, but that's like what he sounds like. And then later this month, when we do the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer episode, just compare those voices. Like, if you still have access to this movie and that movie as well, just compare the voices. They sound a lot similar. So he's questioning him, and he asks for the password, and he says Fidelio, and he's like, no, the second password. And he's like, what? Like, second password? And he's like, all right, like, he's like, I don't know the second password, like, I forgot it. And so they're like, all right, remove your mask. And he's like, okay, and takes his mask off. And then at this point they tell him to take his clothes off. And he's like, what? Like, no, like, you heard me. Like, take off all your clothes, like, right here, like, in front of everybody. And he's like, he's still hesitant about it. But then we hear a voice from the balcony, and it's the woman from before. And she says, like, wait, like, I am ready to redeem him. And then, like, everyone gasps, like, and I don't know what that means. But they all know, apparently. Bill doesn't know either. He's like, okay, like, what's going on? And they're like, are you sure? Do you accept the consequences? And she's like, and she says, yes. And he says, okay, then you're free to go, to Bill. And so he, you know, grabs his stuff, gets back down to his cab, and goes home. Oh, but then before he goes, he says, like, you're free to go, leave here, but no further inquiries about what you saw here. Like, don't ask any questions, and don't tell anybody about what you saw. And basically threatens his family too. Like, if you say anything or keep asking, then we'll hurt your family. So he's like, okay, got out of there. But then he's like, wait, like, what about her? Like, what's going to happen to her? And he says, no one can change her fate now. So very ominous, but also very vague too. So he's like, okay. And then he gets out of there. He goes home. He goes into the bed. Oh, first he hides the costume and everything in his locked file cabinet. And so then he goes to the bedroom to, like, get in bed. And Alice is laughing in her sleep, like, laughing, like, really hard. And he, like, wakes her up and, like, hey, like, what's going on? And she says, oh, I was just having this horrible dream. And she's like, oh, hey, what time is it? And he's like, oh, it's a little after 4. And then she starts to tell him about the dream. And she says that she dreamed that they were both in a deserted city and they were naked. And they're, like, trying to find people. And Bill says, like, oh, like, here, like, I'll go find help. You stay here. And then she says that she felt this, like, immense feeling of relief when he left. And just, like, everything was better when he left and he wasn't around anymore. And then, like, she sees the sailor from Cape Cod, and then, like, she says something to him, but then he just starts laughing at her. And then she's having sex with them, and then there's people watching, and then they're also having sex, and then she's, like, sleeping around with, like, all these different men and everything. And then, like, talks about having this feeling, like, of Bill, like, wanting to see so she can, like, laugh at him and, like, laugh in his face. And so that's intense. And Bill's, like, you know, obviously not knowing how to feel about that. But also it's, like, he's, like, disturbed by it, but also by the fact that it's semi-similar to what he just went through that night. So he's like, okay, like, that's a little eerily close to my literal night that I had. So next day, he's tries to go back to the jazz club, but it's closed. And they're like, so he goes into the diner next door, and asks the waitress about it. And she's like, oh yeah, they're not going to be until like way later today. And he's like, oh, like, do you know Nick Nightingale? And she's like, oh yeah, he comes in here all the time. And he's like, oh, do you know where he's staying? And she's like, yeah, but I like can't tell you that. And he pulls the doctor card, and he's like, oh, like, he's a patient of mine, and I just need to give him some news on test results. And so she's like, okay, like, he's staying at this hotel. And so he goes to the hotel, and he's talking to the desk clerk, and he's asking him questions, and he's like, oh, is he here? And he's like, no, he checked out. And he's like, okay, like, when did he check out? And he said that he checked out at 5 a.m. And he's like, well, did you notice anything weird? And he tells them, saying that, like, oh, well, he came back at 4:30 in the morning with two men. And he had a bruise on his face. And he looked scared. And then he went up to the room with one of the men. Oh, that's what it was. So the other man, he stayed down in the lobby to scope it out, but also he was there to like settle the bill and everything. So he's the one that like paid for the hotel and everything, while the other guy was upstairs like getting his bags packed and everything. But as Nick was leaving, he tried to pass an envelope to the clerk, but then one of the men like took it from him, and so like never got the envelope or anything like that. So it's like, okay, like obviously it's like something bad went down. So then he's like, okay, like fine, I'll return the costume and everything. He goes to return the costume, but the mask is missing. He's like, oh, like I must have lost it. Like I don't know what happened to it. I'll just pay for it. And he's okay, so he just adds it to the bill. Not that expensive. But then as he's there, then he sees the underage daughter from the night before come out with the same two middle-aged men. And they seem all happy and then like thanking the owner of the store. And Tom Cruise is like, well, what the hell? Like last night you were going to arrest them. Like what was going on back there? And he's like, well, we came to a different arrangement. So basically it's like this very sinister thing of this like guy was like, oh, like they basically offered me enough money to sleep with my daughter, so I did that. So it's also just very sickening, very gross, very uncomfortable. And Tom Cruise is like, fine, like I'm out of here, like gets out of there. Goes to work. But then he's like sitting there in the office and he's like still thinking about everything, and he's just like can't just be sitting there. And the assistant comes in, or nurse, someone that works there for him, comes in, and he's like, hey, like what appointments do I have this afternoon? And she's like, oh, just these two. And he's like, I have to go home early, like something came up. Could you either give them to the other doctor or reschedule them? And she's like, okay, no problem. And so he heads off. He drives from his work over to the mansion in the daylight, and he's there just like outside the gate. He sees a security camera is watching him, and he's kind of just looking into the camera, and he's not there. He's not waiting there very long. And then this Rolls Royce pulls up from inside, and guy gets out and looking like a skinny Dick Cheney, and hands him an envelope, and envelope has his name on it. Like, so they were like expecting him to come, because I don't think they just like, oh shit, he's here, then like got on the typewriter and printed it out real quick. So they knew he was coming back and were prepared for that situation. Hands him the envelope. It's got his name on it. And I wrote down what it says. It says, give up your inquiries which are completely useless, and consider these words a second warning. We hope for your own good that this will be sufficient. So he's like, all right, like he's more like despondent again, and he's just like doesn't know what to do. He's back out that night, just wandering around. He goes back to his office, and he's there at night, and he calls Marion, like, presumably because he just can't stop thinking about, like, get this idea of, like, revenge cheating on his wife out of his head, and calls Marion, but then Carl picks up, and then he just doesn't say anything and hangs up the phone. Then he goes to Domino, the sex worker. He goes back to her apartment, and her roommate answers the door. And he, like, brings her a pie and everything. It's like he's being very nice, which it's like, maybe just be nice to your wife and maybe none of this would have happened, or just not be with her. I don't know. Who knows? Like, just, it's a bad situation. And then, oh yeah, so he's talking to the roommate, and she's like, oh, you must be Dr. Bill. Like, she was talking about how nice you were and everything. And so he goes into the apartment with her, with the roommate, and he's like, oh, like, is Domino coming back? And she's like, oh, I don't think she's coming back tonight, and I don't know if she's ever coming back. And he's like, what do you mean by that? And then she's, like, very hesitant, but then finally comes out with it, saying that this morning Domino got her blood test results back, and she's HIV positive. And so that's very, like, at least being, like, a doctor, and enough after the AIDS panic, he wasn't just like, oh, like, I was in the same room. I feel like if this was in the 80s, then he would have been, like, freaked out, like, being, like, breathing the same air as her. But he's a doctor, so he knows, like, okay, like, and he just knows how, like, bad that is, and he just feels really bad, and just, like, says, like, oh, like, if you see her, like, tell her I'm sorry and everything like that. So then he leaves that apartment, and he's walking down the street and notices he's being followed by somebody, like a bald man in a trench coat. So he's like, okay, like, that's freaking him out. He's, like, walking a little faster. He's, like, changing streets, and the guy's still following him. And then he ends up just, like, hiding out in a cafe, and grabs a newspaper, and he's reading it. And there's a big headline saying, ex-beauty queen in a hotel drugs overdose. And so then he's like, he just has a feeling that, like, this woman who saved him last night was going to get some kind of punishment, and that maybe this was her. And he, like, needs to know, or at least, like, needs to investigate. So he goes to the hospital where she was taken, and pretends like, hey, like, I was this patient's doctor, and I know she was admitted here. Can I see her? And they're like, oh, like, she passed away. And so he's like, okay, like, can I see the body? And he goes down there, and he's in the morgue, and he's thinking that that it's her, but he doesn't know for sure because he never saw her face. And, it's like, unless he was, like, overly examining her nude body, then he's not going to know exactly, like, okay, that's her, like, the areola matches. But I don't think that's what he was doing. But he just knows, like, deep down that this was probably her. So at this point, then he gets called back to Ziegler's place. He's like, okay, like, another house call. Let me get over there. And so he gets in there, and Ziegler's just, like, playing pool, like, being normal. It's like, okay, he's not sick, so what's this about? And basically, like, after beating around the bush for a little bit, it comes out that Ziegler knows about the party. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I was there. Like, I was at that party. And I know you were there because you got unmasked and called out and everything. And basically, he's like, okay, like, he saw Bill there. And he's like, how the hell did Bill find out about this? And then he's like, oh, yeah, at my party, you were talking to that stupid piano player. So it had to have been him. Like, you guys knew each other, so he had to be the one. So basically, he's the one that ratted out Nick and got him, like, beat up and maybe killed. Who knows? And he's like, I know what you've been going through. Like, I'm the one that had you followed because, like, I was worried about you. And he's like, there's these people here at this party. Like, if I told you who they were, like, you wouldn't sleep. So that does, like, kind of play into that theory. Like, I was joking before, like, oh, like, Hillary Clinton was there and stuff like that, and the Epstein, but, like, that is, like, the intention is that it is these it is these celebrities, these politicians, your mayor, all this stuff. Like that's who's at these parties, and that's who like is being called out in this type of movie. Not directly, obviously, but it's just that's the whole point, is that like as elite as you think people are, like they're getting away with like crazy stuff. And I'm not gonna say that they're like at the Comet Ping Pong and the Pizzagate and all that stuff. Like I'm not buying into that, but there's obviously some crazy stuff that goes on the very high levels. Maybe not as much as conspiracy theorists want you to believe, but there's more than we know. And if there isn't, it's just fun to think about. So that's about it. So yeah. So he's telling him all this stuff, and then Bill's just like kind of freaking out and like doesn't know what to do. And then Ziegler tells him, he's like, suppose I told you that this was all staged and it's all like made up just to scare you. So it's like no one was murdered, like Nick was taken away. They told you all these threats and all that stuff just to like scare you away from asking more questions. And it's like, yeah, maybe that would make you feel better, but then it's like, then maybe they're doing more than what I saw, and that's why they're trying to scare me away. You know what I mean? It's like, because that woman did die, like, and then Ziegler does admit it, saying that like, yeah, she died, but she was a druggie. Like she got home safe, and then just happened to OD in the hotel room. The hotel room was locked from the inside. Like no one could have got in there. So it's like you can believe that and you can not believe that. Either way, like someone died. That's a thing that did happen. So whether it was all fake, whether it was real, whether there is an actual threat on his life, or if Ziegler's just like, hey, it's fine, they're just wanting to scare you, just stay out of it. But like the one thing that does come out of it is that in saying all that, Ziegler does admit that it is the same woman, that's the one that saved you at the party, saved in quotes, as he's trying to say that it was all fake, and that that is the same woman that died and OD'd and everything. So Bill's like, all right, he's freaked out again, but he goes back home. He kind of unwinds. He's drinking a beer in the kitchen alone and everything. And then when he's finally ready to go to bed, he gets into the bedroom, and his mask, the one that was lost, is laying on the pillow next to Alice. And they never say, like, did Alice find it and she put it there? Like, kind of like, oh, I'm going to ask him about this when he gets home. Did someone break into his house to, like, scare him but also tip off Alice? Like, it's never said one way or the other. But he sees that mask and he just breaks down crying. He's just sobbing and sobbing. That wakes Alice up, and she's like, what's going on? And he's just sobbing, like, I'll tell you everything. But okay. So that is like an emotional scene, and it works. But the weird thing is that, like, so it cuts to Alice, it cuts to her, and it's the morning. You could see like the daylight on her face, like her eyes are red and watery, like she's been crying. She's been hearing this whole story of everything that happened, and that's like good. That's effective. It works. Everything like that. But then when it cuts to the wide shot and you see Bill, he's in a completely different outfit, and it's like, I'm just trying to think about like him getting there and like sobbing, like, oh, I'll tell you everything, and then like going to change into a comfy sweater and to sit down on the couch to tell the story. It's just like, I don't know, it's funny. Like, you think, I mean, if I'm like having a mental breakdown and I'm crying, like, I'm not gonna like, oh wait, let me slip into something more comfortable for my breakdown. But that's what Bill does, apparently. Maybe that was just a continuity error, but it's just, That's just something I noticed this time. I haven't noticed it in the previous watches, but that just made me laugh. But yeah, so he told her everything. She just looks completely drained and like spaced out, like, oh my gosh, like everything. And it's just crazy. And it's like, obviously, like if you took all of that in and it's like, okay, is like my husband insane? Like, what does this mean? And then, so then it just cuts to like, okay, like our daughter's going to be up soon and I promised her we'd go Christmas shopping. So then next scene is them at the toy store and there's taking her, and then they're like trying to find like the little moments where she's not right there with them to like kind of talk, and they're just like getting like, hey, like, so what do you think we should do? Like, do we stay together? And they're just like kind of like, I don't know, like. And then Alice says, I think we should just be grateful that we have made it this far, that we've survived, and whether it was real things that we did or just a dream, just be happy that we made it through, and that's it. Like, it sucks, but we've both done bad things. One of us acted on it, and like the real life consequences like fucked him over, obviously. You know, she just had like, oh, like I thought about cheating on you, and he was like, fine, I'm gonna go do it, and then like had like the scariest 2 nights of his life. You know, so it kind of came back around on him. He never followed through on anything on it, but it's still like, hey, like that's what you get. And so it kind of ends on like a happy note, like, yeah, we're gonna stay together, and that's it. And like, yeah, and that's it. So yeah, really interesting movie. It's definitely one, and I think this seems to be the case with a lot of Stanley Kubrick stuff for me, is that it took me a couple watches to kind of understand it, but also like enjoy it. And it didn't hit me right the first time, but then like I think hearing about it and just like hearing different theories on it, and like also knowing like what it was too, because I remember it being advertised when it came out and everything, and it just like as a young person, like what I would have been like 10 when this came out, it just basically just seemed like Sex the movie. And it's like, it's them, like you could see that they're kind of naked on the cover, and like it's very like erotic advertising around it, and it's just like, oh, like there's sex in this movie. Like that's like literally like all like I could tell it was about. Like, so I just had this like idea of it in my head forever, and then I watched it, and it's like this crazy like thriller and everything, and like psychological, and then is it real, is it not real? And so it's crazy, but I really enjoy it, and I find something new every single time, and I recommend seeing it and watching it with an open mind. Like, I mean, you either, now you know everything. If you haven't watched it and you made it this far, it's like, now you know like the twists and everything like that. Not that there's like twists, but you know what I mean. But like if you listen through this whole thing and just give it a try, like it's on it's on Netflix. Sorry, it used to be on HBO Max. It probably will be again sometime. But yeah, definitely recommend it. Give it a try. If you did watch it and liked it, but haven't seen anything else that Stanley Kubrick has done, like definitely check out his other stuff. The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, Clockwork Orange, all kinds of stuff. Like he's an amazing guy. Like he was an amazing guy. He's dead now. But yeah, definitely get to some of his other movies along the line, but just wanted to get through this one because it's all taking place during Christmas. You notice I didn't mention Christmas like the whole time, because literally the only time they talk about it is like, the only time they mention it is when they say like, oh, like we got to take her Christmas shopping. But you see like Christmas decorations and all the restaurants and the house and everything like that. So it like feels Christmassy, but like also very dark and everything like that. So it's just Christmas adjacent. But that being said, thank you for listening. And please go to the Instagram if you have any questions. There's also a Facebook page. All of this is linked from the podcast website. So just go there. You can find all the social media links. There's also a YouTube if you don't like to listen to podcasts on the podcast app. Maybe you're already listening from the YouTube. And if you are, thank you. And please remember to follow, like, subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff. And thanks again for listening, and I hope to see you next week. Thanks. Bye.